बिहार के रहने वाली हूँ। दिल्ली में प्रवासी जनमंच के बीच काम करती हूँ। गांव से जो लोग पलायन होके आए हैं उसमें सरकार की नीति क्या, लोगों की व्यवस्था क्या, उसमें धन्यवाद।
I request Professor Gulshan Sachdev for his lecture, and then we wait for main discussant Marco Olvila after him, and then question answer.
Well, thank you, Mr. Vijay Pratap. Well, at the outset, I must thank South Asian Dialogues on Ecological Democracy, SADE, for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to meet very interesting people and discuss something about Europe, because this is what exactly our job is, to propagate Europe in a sense and let people know what is happening inside Europe. But I must make it very clear, I am not an activist, I am a pure academic. So I look things purely from an academic point of view. I am not passionate about green, I am not passionate about anything. I just look things as they are, and to some extent try to look it from purely from Indian perspective, from our own national interest, how things are happening inside Europe, how they are going to affect us. So trying to understand what is happening inside the European institutions, inside the European parliaments, different parliaments, inside the EU, other organs, bureaucracy, how it's going to affect us. So this is what our perspective has been. Now, when we discussed about this particular meeting, and I was told that we are going to discuss all the manifestos of different groups within the European Parliament which are contesting elections. Now, to me, it's it's telling something to people for which I'm sure they know very little. Because if we look, so the idea was to not just looking at the manifestos of certain political groups which are contesting parliamentary elections now in Europe. That of course we will do. But what is the context? What is this European Parliament is? What kind of role they play within the European Union? What kind of institution this is? And how we should really be concerned about this, if at all. Why? If something is happening there, let it happen. Why should we be concerned about European parliamentary elections? So these are the questions which came to my mind, and I said, people, those who are, because since we also deal with students, my understanding is that knowledge about Europe, knowledge about European Union is very low even within Europe itself. So if one is trying to explain one part of this whole larger scheme of European Union, we may not get the right picture. So within this next half an hour or so which has been allotted to me, what I'll try to do is, अगर आप कहेंगे तो मैं बीच में हिंदी में भी explain करता रहूँगा, because some people it will be useful, because anyway some of the things will come in the slides, in English it's there, so मैं बीच में हिंदी में बात करता रहूँगा, वो ज़्यादा संवाद ठीक रहेगा. Now, what is the context is first to understand how this European project has been working for the last few decades. Now, what kind of issues are there now in the last few years? पिछले 3-4 साल से जो पूरा संकट यूरोप के अंदर, खास तौर से जो आर्थिक और फाइनेंशियल संकट वहाँ पे जो है, क्योंकि सारे जितने भी मैनिफेस्टो अगर हम देखते हैं all those manifestos basically now, because all of them are basically they are giving ideas to the voters in inside Europe. So agenda is broadly domestic, European agenda of all manifestos. So all of them are talking about crisis and how to deal with that crisis. The different political parties have different orientation towards that. What do they think about the whole European project? Is it has been a success, or वहाँ पे there are serious question marks? So different political parties have their own take on that. So we'll first try to understand this whole European project and then going to the crisis, and then we'll come back to different manifestos, how do they deal with some of these issues. Now if, say for example, if we are looking today, now there are many elections that are happening inside Europe, inside South Asia. 22 से 25 मई तक वहाँ पे इलेक्शन होने वाले हैं यूरोपियन पार्लियामेंट के, लगभग 750 सीटें हैं. Now elections are happening, we know in India, it's happening in Afghanistan. The whole political transition recently in Pakistan, in Nepal, but interest from both sides. Actually, if one look at debates or even the news items, अगर आप पिछले एक महीने का अखबार अगर खोल के देख लेते हैं कोई भी, I don't think there will be any news item on European elections in Indian newspapers. There might be some news item here or there on Indian elections, particularly because of Modi factor in some of the newspapers in Europe, but otherwise interest is very limited. But it's not just elections. Now this year we are also going to kind of celebrate, if we can celebrate, the whole 10 years of India-EU strategic partnership. Because it was signed in 2004. So उसको भी 10 साल हो गए, लेकिन उसके बारे में कुछ खास पढ़ने को मिलता नहीं है, ना यूरोप में ना यहाँ पे. This year, in fact, is also a decade of Eastern enlargement of the European Union. 2004 में 10 नए countries जुड़े थे European Union में. अब उनका experience क्या रहा है? What has been the experience of those 10 countries in 2004 and later on 2-3 more which have joined? So these are very interesting questions from the European point of view, and to some extent I'll come back later, how do they also affect us? But somehow, I don't see anything, any debate, any discussion of any of these issues is happening inside India. Now why this is so? उसका एक सबसे बड़ा कारण ये है, because whatever we have read in the last 2-3 years about Europe, in Indian newspapers or particularly in the English newspapers, even if they are published from outside India, whether in the US or to some extent even in UK, 90% stories about Europe, they are about financial crisis. So there is a perception somehow in the minds of ordinary citizen, if at all the person has read anything about Europe, that there is something serious crisis happening in Europe, which is true, which is happening. In fact, उसके बारे में पिछले साल 2012 में, in fact, there was an article published in Foreign Affairs, and उससे पहले it was published in New York Times, 1st September 2012. Professor Timothy Garton-Ash is a professor of European Studies at Oxford. He raised a couple of questions. Who won the most medals at Olympics? This was immediately after Summer Olympics. And if you put together all European countries, obviously Europe had won most of the medals. Who has the largest economy in the world? If you put European economies, even the EU economies together, obviously this becomes बहुत बड़ी अर्थव्यवस्था बन जाती है. तो सबसे बड़ी अर्थव्यवस्था यूरोप की है. Where do most people want to go for holiday? यूरोप. जिसको भी पहला मौका मिलेगा, अगर किसी को जाना है घूमने के लिए, वो रोम जाना चाहेगा, पेरिस जाना चाहेगा, लंदन जाना चाहेगा. So obviously people would like to go to Europe. So in that sense, the question was raised, so many measures of power, EU belongs with the US and China in the global big three. इकोनॉमी देख लीजिए, उनका प्रभाव देख लीजिए पूरे सब तरफ, तो ऑब्वियसली यूरोप बहुत बड़ा एक पावर है. लेकिन the question that it was raised, if you raise this question, if you say this to the officials in Beijing, Washington, Delhi or any other major capital, अगर आप उनसे जाके बात करते हैं कि यूरोप बहुत बड़ी इंपॉर्टेंट चीज है, तो कोई ज्यादा प्रभाव उनके ऊपर पड़ता नहीं है, क्योंकि या तो वो चाइना की तरफ देख रहे हैं कि चाइना इतना बड़ा आगे बढ़ गया है, वो सबसे बड़ा भी आर्थिक तौर से, राजनीतिक तौर से, कूटनीतिक तौर से, और the US of course is a very big power. Because why this is happening? Because 3 साल से 4 साल से what people are thinking is perceived the potential superpower is basically viewed as a sick man of the developed world. क्योंकि यहाँ पे एक बहुत बड़ा संकट है, प्रॉब्लम चल रही है, इसलिए जो उसकी जो महानता है, जो उसकी बड़ी चीजें हैं, वो भी पीछे दब गई हैं यूरोप में. This is happening because of sovereign debt crisis in Europe. So for the last 4 years, now Europe is facing a very serious crisis. And this has become one of the biggest challenge of Europe. In fact, the European Commission के जो president हैं, Mr. Barroso, he himself described it's a most serious challenge of a generation. And then what he said later on, that it's not just a financial and economic crisis, it's also a social crisis, but also a political crisis, but most importantly a crisis of confidence. तो उस क्राइसिस के चलते जो यूरोप का अपना एक कॉन्फिडेंस है, that confidence itself has been shaken. Because Europe, otherwise it was a very successful project. But as a result of this particular crisis, the confidence is low even within Europe itself. In fact, economists wrote that the crisis in the euro area is beginning to look like a permanent piece of the world economic landscape. This is what he wrote last year. He was written as an economist. Now, उसको समझने के लिए I think थोड़ी सी 2 मिनट अगर इस पे हम लगाते हैं कि क्यों ये सारा कुछ वहाँ यूरोप में, why this is happening. If you look at stages of deepening regional integration, we don't have much time to go into details about these different stages, but broadly what you can see, this is how countries start moving when they start integrating. Starting with free trade agreement, with trade liberalization, becoming customs union, when you also have a common commercial policy for outsider. Then you also have a common market where you have a free movement of factors. Labor can move, capital can move. So Europe में ये सब कुछ तो this has already happened in Europe. They integrated. Now once you move from there, you go to economic union. Along with free movement of factors, you also have a common monetary and fiscal policy. Now this is the point where somehow the Europe is stuck today. You have a common monetary policy for those countries which have a single currency euro. But at the same time, you do not have common fiscal policy. We'll come back to many of these issues in detail to understand the problems and how these parties are reacting to some of these issues. So somewhere, Europe today, in a very simple textbook fashion, has stuck somewhere at this stage where how to deal with the situation. You already have very successful integration here. Coming to common monetary policy, which you have, but you do not have a common fiscal policy. And some of the elements of common government are already there, like you have a European Parliament, which we'll see. These are going beyond even this. So somewhere this is where the problem is. Now just go back a couple of decades. Now this was the situation of Europe immediately after post-war period. Totally devastated economy. हजारों लोग मर गए, जो वहाँ की अर्थव्यवस्था थी 20 साल, 50 साल, 60 साल पीछे चली गई अलग-अलग countries. And these are the pictures one can see immediately after Second World War in Europe. And we are quite familiar with all these pictures. Now this is what Berlin Cathedral was there in 1945, this is what you can see in 1997, these are the pictures. So basically just to capture what was the kind of situation was immediately after Second World War. It was a devastated European industries and infrastructure. At the same time, they were also fearful of Soviet aggression, because as a result of Second World War, Soviet Union had become big. So already they were in Eastern Europe. So there was a fear within Western Europe they might expand further into Western Europe. But at the same time, the Europe was also economically and militarily dependent on the US. So this is the situation in which they were there after the Second World War. So the key question for Europe was, really, because all this thing happened because you had war. So how to avoid war? But to avoid war, first we also have to diagnose कि उसका कारण क्या है. So तीन मुख्य धाराएं वहाँ पे, about in three ways, different schools of thought. One is blame the loser. Because of Germany is culprit. So if this is what the situation is, because so there was a school of thought that if Germany is the culprit, then somehow something has to be done about Germany. The whole idea of neutral Germany, Morgenthau plan, whatever was being discussed, so Germany को नीचे कर दिया. दूसरा था capitalism. The left was quite strong in some of the countries in Europe. So many people thought that because of the internal contradiction of the system, this is capitalism which is going to destroy Europe. So if that is what the reason is, then you adopt communism or socialism, which was already happening in some parts of Europe. And then some other thought, it's not because of capitalism, but it's destructive nationalism. So if the cause is destructive nationalism, because it's not only Germany, but we also have many other countries like Italy and others, where also nationalism was very much there. So if that is what the reason is, then one has to pursue European integration project. What kind of integration? But ultimately this whole the integration idea prevailed, but still it wasn't very clear till the late 40s what kind of integration they want to have. And then already you had a divided Europe. But if you say that we want to integrate Europe, so there was different approaches to integration. The first, you have intergovernmental cooperation approach, where basically different governments will cooperate. You can cooperate in agriculture, you can cooperate in industry, you can cooperate like many governments do. So this is one way you can have a integrated Europe. The second approach, you have the federalist approach, which is basically United States of Europe. Means an executive, parliament, court, all supranational institution above the nation state. So this is one approach. Like many other federal countries, you can also have United States of Europe. And the third approach, you have the functionalist approach, which is basically a sectoral integration involving transfer of elements of sovereignty to supranational institution in specific fields of policy. तो कुछ areas में, खास तौर से उस period में coal and steel industry, which they thought was very important. So in those areas, perhaps over the national state, certain sovereignty has to be transferred to other institutions. And then you have a socialist integration, which was already happening in the communist part of Europe. So different approaches to European integration. And from these kind of approaches, the whole integration projects started. But this was also the period Cold War begins, USSR pushed communism in the East, the whole neutral Germany solution was abundant in favor of strong Germany and European integration. And then the objectives of this integration was not just purely economic, but also preventing internal European conflicts, strengthening position of Europe between two superpowers, promoting human rights, democracy, and strengthening Western Europe against Soviet aggression. So it was a much more larger project than just purely an economic project. And then we all know that this integration within Europe started with coal and steel community. And since then, what we can see the journey for the last 50, 60 years in Europe, everything is based since then is based on the treaties, from Treaty of Paris, from the European Coal and Steel Community to the latest treaty, or the Lisbon Treaty, what we have now. Since then, many stages one can see of this European integration project. And then, since 1992, you have a couple of other treaties, from Maastricht Treaty to Amsterdam Treaty, Nice Treaty, and then now we have this Lisbon Treaty. Now, this is just very briefly, but what today the way European Union functions. Now, there is on certain areas, the Union has exclusive competence to make directives and conclude international agreements. So these are certain areas where you do not have nation state, which are basically competence, particularly the competition policy, customs union, monetary policy, common fishery policy, commercial policy, and international agreements. So in these areas, the competencies of the Union, and within that Union now the European Parliament is going to play more important role. And then there is also a shared competence in many of those areas which are listed samne. In certain areas it's a shared competence with the nation governments as well as with the Union institutions, and then there in certain areas Union gives the supportive competence. Industry, tourism, culture, etc. So the history of enlargement, what one can see of the European Union, starting from 1952 till the recent one, Croatia joined. So from 6 countries, now you have 28 countries within the European Union. There are different stages from 73, 81, 86, 95. The big chunk started in 2004 when 10 countries from Central Eastern Europe joined, and 2007 Bulgaria, Romania, and recently Croatia joined. And these are the countries which are potential countries, potential candidate, all candidate countries, so they may join at some day. It means it's much larger union may happen. But at the same time one has to see that it's not that all 28 are really equal. Because some of them are reasonably big countries within the European context and others are very small. Some are just tiny nations, 12, 13, which are just like a few billion or a couple of billion populations. It's like some big city in the Indian context. At the same time, most of these countries you can see the per capita income wise, economy wise, some of them are pretty rich, others are still very poor. I mean, if you're comparing, say, a country like Luxembourg to Bulgaria, Romania, the difference will be quite huge. But at the same time, what one can see, different countries, but the economies are basically today service economy, because more than 70%, 72, 73% of the European economy, even individual countries' economies are roughly in the service sector. Less than 2% economies are in agriculture. So it means agriculture is not really so important as far as the economies are concerned. So it's a service sector which is going, which is really, it's not that they are bad in industry, but even if you have 25% industry, but in some of the industries they are really dominating and they are pretty productive in many of those areas. But within those 28, the first 10 economies actually are about 85% of the whole EU economy, and first 6 are about 76% of the economy of the EU. So some of the big economy, Germany, France, UK, they really dominate economic scene within the European Union. But the question is, what is really European Union? It's not a federation like India or the US. It is also not a simple organization or cooperation between the governments. It's a kind of a unique institutions. It's very difficult to compare EU with any other organization because this is unique. The countries which make up EU remain independent sovereign countries. All 28 are sovereign countries. But they pool their sovereignty in certain areas, not in all areas. In certain areas they pool their sovereignty, like in trade matters. When India is negotiating with the European Union free trade agreement, we are negotiating with the EU. We are not negotiating with France or UK or any other country. But in other matters, you do deal bilaterally. So in practical means that the member state delegates some of their decision-making power to those institutions, like we have in the Commission or in the Parliament. As a result, some of the decisions are taken at the European level and some of the decisions are taken at the national level. And within that, the core institutions, this is what in fact will come back to the Parliament now. The European Parliament is one of the core institutions of the European Union. In fact, this is the only institution which is directly elected by the citizens. Other institutions, which are the Council of the European Union, where individual member states are represented through their ministers. If the matter is on finance, all the finance ministers will meet there. Then you have the European Commission, which is the whole bureaucratic body, which is again not directly elected by people. Then you have the European Council, which is basically all the government, head of the governments they meet. So the European Parliament is important within this scheme of things because this is directly elected by the European citizens. So there is a direct, it means there is a more democratic side to this, to the European Parliament. Now elections to this Parliament takes place every 5 years. And every registered voter within the EU, they are entitled to vote. The present Parliament, which is outgoing Parliament, it has about 766 members from 28 countries. And all these members, MEPs, they do not sit in the national blocs. They sit in Europe-wide political groups. And between them, they represent all kind of views on European integration, from strongly pro-federalist to openly Eurosceptics. So you have all kind of members. It's not that everybody sitting in the European Parliament is pro-European. I mean, many of them are also Eurosceptic. So within the elections, the principle of digressive proportionality is applied. It means the seats are given to the countries depending on your population. The bigger the countries, the more seats of the parliament you have, but it doesn't mean automatically same proportionally, because the smaller countries are actually given more seats. It's not that exactly that the Germany population and the Malta population would be exactly proportionate. There would be, of course, big difference between these two, but not exactly. So smaller countries are given slightly more seats. So that's the principle is. And the voting practices vary across EU. It's not that exactly the same kind of voting pattern everywhere, it's different. Although there are some common elements. The one is, the most important, which is that some form of proportional representative should be used in every country. So, every political party which gets certain threshold, which is about 5%, beyond that, they should be able to get on the parliament. Some member states split their territory into regional electoral districts, while others have a single electoral district for the whole country. Election usually span 4 days, like voting in UK even and Netherlands will take place on Thursday, but most other countries it's going to take place on Sunday. Now elections are contested by national political parties. But once MEPs are elected, most opt to become part of the transnational political groups, which already the political parties are affiliated. Like the last parliament, you had about 766 members, so this is what the numbers one can see from different countries. Obviously you can see the bigger countries have bigger numbers and smaller countries have smaller numbers. And this is what in different, one is quite complicated stuff. I mean, the numbers have been changing, but now under Lisbon Treaty, the number has been fixed to 751. So now even if more countries join, but still the numbers would be adjusted within 751. So otherwise, for many years numbers have been going up and down, because if some more members join, numbers will change. But now it has been fixed to 751. Now the largest of these groups within the parliament, what you have is the European People's Party, Christian Democrats basically from different countries, and Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats. So two major groups, and then another 5 or 6 other groups. And the work of the parliament is overseen by the European Party President. Currently, the German politician Martin Schulz, he is from the Socialist Group. The president is elected for 2.5 years. So it means within the one parliament you will have 2 presidents. One for the first 2.5 years and the second for the second 2.5 years. And the 14 vice president, 22 committees and everything. Now this was the composition of not the present one, but the last parliament. So you can see the different political groups. The blue ones, 228 members, basically from the Christian Democrats group, conservative left, central left, centre right kind of group. And then you have the second group from the socialist group. This is the earlier group, parliament. And then the current parliament by April 2012, you see the numbers roughly the same kind of composition. So two major groups, European People's Party and then the Progressive Alliance of Socialists, about 190 members. Then you have about 58, 60 members from the Greens, and then a couple of others. So you can clearly see from here, from red to blue, going to extreme left to extreme right. So this is how situation in the European Parliament broadly one can see. And over the years, what one can see that there is slight tendency going toward the right. In European different elections, you can see for the last 6 elections, it means every time the more members are elected, which is slightly one can club into the right side, and the left is slightly declining. This is what is happening in the last couple of years, couple of elections in Europe. It has 3 places of work in Brussels, Luxembourg, and Strasbourg. Meetings of the whole parliament, plenary sessions, they take place in Strasbourg and sometime in Brussels, and then the committee meetings, and these one can detail, one can find anywhere. But the main role of the parliament, they pass European laws, all kind of laws which are under the union competence, they come here. They also have the democratic supervision. Since this is directly elected body, so they have more authority in a sense because they are directly elected by people. And then on certain matters, particularly the EU budget, they play a very important role. So this is what broadly the role of the European Parliament one can see. Now if you look at the composition of different political groups within the European Parliament, now this is not an exhaustive list, but a couple of the major, like you can say the European People's Party, the center-right, this particular group contains MEPs from Germany's Christian Democrats Party, France's UMP, and Spain's PP party and Italian parties. So that's, there are of course so many other parties also, but these are some of the major parties. Similarly, you can see Progressive Alliance for Socialists and Democrats, the center left. This is from Social Democrat, SPD from Germany, Socialist Party, the UK's Labour Party and others. So all of them, they join this particular socialist group from different political parties. And the list goes on. Like Greens, they have different green groups from different different countries within Europe. And these countries actually their membership even beyond the European Union in other countries as well. Now, 2 or 3 major groups, what you can see. The European People's Party, this is kind of a center-right political family. It strives for a Europe of values, close to the people and based on democracy, transparency and responsibility, basically promotion of social market economy. This is what the motto of all the groups, all the political parties which are there. At the moment, according to their website, there are about 74 parties from 39 countries. And at the moment, they are the largest group in the European Parliament and likely to remain largely even in the current elections which are going to take place. In fact, most of the heads of the states and the governments of any political family in the European Council. So, today when the European Council meets, most of the heads of the states, they actually come from the European People's Party, the parties which belong to this particular group. And then you have the second party of European Socialists. They put together about 53 socialists, social democrats and labour parties of Europe and the neighboring countries. Again, the group, democracy, equality, solidarity, social justice, these are from when you look at the record in the European Parliament, most of the time actually they are voted together. So it's not something they're very, far away from each other, but we'll come back to those issues in a minute. And then you have so many other parties. One can go to the website so you can get all the details about other parties, Greens or European Left and other, and a couple of more as well.